Brenda watched the champagne splash across Dale's expensive tuxedo jacket, his face slackening as the room fell silent. Her caustic remark about his new venture still hung in the air, a cruel echo. He stood there, drenched and exposed, the crowd's gaze a heavy weight. Some people just don't belong, her socialite rival purred, a predatory smile stretching her lips. The cool droplets clung to Dale's lapel, catching the ballroom lights like tiny shattered stars. Brenda saw the immediate flicker of surprise drain from his eyes, replaced by a cold, flat emptiness that mirrored the marble floors. He didn't flinch, didn't react beyond that initial quick change. It was a practiced stillness, the kind of quiet retreat she'd seen in wounded animals. A hollow ache settled in her own stomach. The quiet in the room was heavier than the music had been, punctuated only by the clink of silverware and the hushed whispers of the city's elite. She had done this. The thought registered with a chilling precision, a realization of her own destructive power, honed and perfected over years. That power was a legacy, inherited and polished. Her mother, Sharon Hayes, had instilled it with the careful patience of a craftsman. "Appearances are everything, Brenda," Sharon would say, her voice smooth as silk, her gaze sharper than any needle. "People are assets. You manage them, cultivate them, or discard them when they cease to be useful." Brenda had learned to categorize faces, measure smiles, and assess the net worth behind every handshake. Love was a transaction, friendships alliances, and vulnerability a weakness to be exploited or, more often, hidden. The Hayes name was a fortress, built on generations of calculated moves and impeccable presentation. Brenda wore her inherited glamour like a second skin, heavy with expectation, tight with restraint. 3 years before, that skin had felt particularly suffocating. The annual symphony fundraiser was another obligation, a predictable gathering of the same faces, the same polite chatter. Brenda had drifted through the crowd, representing the Hayes Family Foundation, making the requisite small talk, her smile fixed and practiced. Then she saw him, Dale Jensen. He stood by a display of sheet music, not engaging in conversation, but genuinely engrossed in the program. His shoulders were relaxed, his gaze fixed on the stage, a faint, easy smile playing on his lips as the orchestra warmed up. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit that looked like it belonged to him, not like something he was trying to fit into. There was an ease about him, a comfort in his own skin that was utterly foreign to Brenda's world of carefully constructed facades. Most men she encountered were trying to impress her, or at least impress her family's name. Dale wasn't. He seemed oblivious to the jostling, the subtle posturing that defined such events. He was simply there listening. Brenda, accustomed to the constant performance, felt a strange pull toward that quiet authenticity. It was a magnetism she hadn't anticipated, a quiet force drawing her away from the predictable orbits. She found herself moving toward him, not with a strategic purpose, but with a hesitant curiosity she rarely allowed herself. They talked for hours that night after the concert, lingering over lukewarm coffee in the grand foyer. Brenda, to her own surprise, found herself unusually honest. She spoke of the relentless expectations, the pressure of the family name, the exhaustion of constantly maintaining an image. It wasn't a complaint, but a factual recounting of a privileged yet burdensome life. She hadn't realized how much she'd held back, how much she craved a listener who wasn't analyzing her words for ulterior motives. Dale listened with an attentive quietness, occasionally offering a nod, his eyes steady and clear. He, in turn, shared stories of his own. His voice was calm, unassuming, with a hint of a Midwestern lilt. He spoke of growing up in a small town in Nebraska, of working after school, of teaching himself to code in his spare time. His success in software, he explained, wasn't a grand design, but a result of persistent curiosity and hard work, one problem solved leading to the next. He wasn't boastful, just factual. His self-made success felt grounded, real, unlike the inherited wealth and established networks Brenda knew. Brenda felt a spark, a rare, genuine excitement that resonated deep within her, a sensation she hadn't experienced since her carefree teenage years, before the weight of the Hayes name truly settled upon her shoulders. It was a lightness, a feeling of possibility she thought she had long since outgrown. Their relationship blossomed quickly, a quiet unfolding that defied the fast-paced, transactional nature of her usual encounters. Their dates were simple: walks in the park, quiet dinners at unpretentious restaurants, evenings spent talking on his small apartment balcony, not about grand plans or social standings, but about books they'd read, ideas they'd considered, the small details of their days. He truly listened when she spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk. It was a profound novelty. Her friends, of course, had their opinions. "He's not Hayes material, Brenda," Celeste had said, sipping champagne, her eyes flicking over Dale's unassuming jacket at a gallery opening. "He's simple." Another chimed in, "You're still young, you need a reliable man, someone with real connections." They spoke as if Dale were a minor inconvenience, a temporary aberration. Brenda ignored them. For the first time, she was experiencing a happiness that felt entirely her own, unconnected to her family's legacy or the world's expectations. It was a happiness built on shared laughter, easy companionship, and a profound sense of being truly seen. Dale, unlike anyone else, seemed to look past the polished facade, the perfectly coiffed hair, the designer clothes. He saw the real Brenda, the woman tired of performing, and he loved what he found. Dale met Robert and Sharon Hayes a little over a year into their relationship. Brenda had put it off, knowing the kind of scrutiny he would face. The dinner was held at her parents' sprawling estate, a place Dale had only seen in glossy magazine spreads. He arrived precisely on time, a bottle of expensive Italian wine in hand, his earnestness a sharp contrast to the cool indifference that usually permeated the Hayes household. Robert Hayes, a man whose presence filled any room without him ever raising his voice, greeted Dale with a handshake that was firm, but not entirely warm. His eyes, Brenda noticed, did a quick, almost imperceptible scan of Dale's attire. Dale wore a dark blue suit, well-maintained and clean, but definitely not custom-tailored. Robert's gaze lingered on the lapels, then his cuff. "Jensen," Robert said, a slight tilt of his head. "Good to finally meet you." Brenda speaks fondly. The implication hung in the air, a faint, almost invisible cloud, suggesting that fondly was perhaps too strong a word, or that Brenda's judgment was at times questionable. Later, over creme brulee, Robert cleared his throat. "Brenda tells me you have built quite a business for yourself. Impressive. It's rare to see someone make their way these days without proper backing, or perhaps a tailor who understands fit." He gestured vaguely at Dale's shoulder. It wasn't an accusation, just a quiet observation, a social pinprick. The words were delivered with a casual air, as if discussing the weather, but the message was clear. Dale was an outsider, lacking the polished veneer of their world. His off-the-rack suit was merely a symptom of a deeper inadequacy. Sharon Hayes, ever the more direct of the two, didn't bother with subtlety. She was a woman who believed in cutting to the chase. Her questions, posed across the gleaming mahogany dining table, were like precise surgical strikes. "Dale, darling, tell us about your family," she began, her smile fixed but her eyes searching. "Where did your people come from? Are they in software too? Any established connections we might know?" She paused, sipping her water. "It's so important to have a good foundation, isn't it? A network." She wasn't genuinely curious about his family history. She was assessing his social capital, his lineage, calculating his potential value, or lack thereof, as an asset to the Hayes name. Brenda felt a hot flush creep up her neck. Her spine stiffened. She gripped her fork, the metal cool in her palm. "Mother, father, that's enough," she interjected, her voice sharper than she intended. "What does any of that matter? Dale is a good man. He's intelligent, successful. You're being elitist and completely judgmental." She pushed back fiercely, defending him against the quiet social violence her parents inflicted. She saw the flicker of surprise in Dale's eyes, a slight tensing of his jaw. He hadn't said a word, just absorbed their comments with a quiet dignity that only made Brenda's anger burn hotter. She continued, her voice rising slightly. "You always do this. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to anyone who doesn't fit into your predetermined boxes." Despite her fiery defense, the words had already landed, burrowing deep. Her parents' dismissive glances, Sharon's pointed questions, Robert's subtle jab about the suit, they reactivated old familiar anxieties within Brenda. All her life, she had sought their approval, striving for perfection, for the right connections, the right achievements, all to earn a nod of recognition from them. Their judgment of Dale felt like a condemnation of her own choices, a quiet indictment of her ability to discern quality, to pick a partner who truly measured up. It was a rejection not just of Dale, but of the parts of herself that had been drawn to his unassuming nature, his genuine kindness. The happiness she'd felt with him, that rare, unburdened lightness, suddenly felt fragile, exposed to the cold winds of her parents' disapproval. Subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, a shift began in Brenda's behavior towards Dale. It was like a tiny rust spot appearing on a polished surface, growing slowly, changing the texture. She didn't consciously decide to change. It was more an echo of her parents' voices, a quiet whisper in her own mind. One evening, while getting ready for a dinner with some of her former sorority sisters, Brenda looked at Dale's favorite tweed jacket. "You know," she said carefully, "that jacket is nice, but maybe for tonight, something a little fresher. My friends, they really notice things, just an update maybe. You've done so well with your company, you should let it show a little." Her tone was light, framed as helpful, but it carried an undercurrent of suggestion, a gentle nudge toward conformity. She started making similar comments about other pieces of his wardrobe, hinting about designer sales or investing in a few key pieces. Then came the table manners. They were at a crowded bistro, and Dale, absorbed in telling a story, reached across her plate for the salt shaker. Brenda's hand darted out, gently but firmly intercepting his. "Dale," she murmured, a tight smile on her face. "Excuse me, it's just easier if I pass it." The action was small, almost imperceptible to others, but the public correction, however subtle, hung in the air. Another time she noticed him using the wrong fork for his salad. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You'll want the smaller one for that. It's quite delicate." Most noticeably, she began to interrupt him. During conversations with her friends, when Dale would share an anecdote or explain a concept from his work, Brenda would often jump in. "What Dale means," she'd say, interjecting smoothly, "is that the algorithm optimizes for X, not Y. Or, he's trying to say that the market shifted because of Z." She'd rephrase his words, ostensibly to clarify or help. But in reality, she was subtly taking control of his narrative, shaping it into something she felt was more palatable, more acceptable for her circle. The warm, genuine connection they had built, the easy flow of their conversations, began to feel slightly constrained, tinged with a faint, uneasy tension. Dale, with his quiet perceptiveness, couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in Brenda. One evening, after she had corrected his pronunciation of a French wine at a restaurant, he waited until they were back in his apartment, the city lights a distant hum outside the window. He sat across from her on the sofa, his hands resting easily on his knees. "Brenda," he began, his voice soft, "is something bothering you? You seem different lately." His gaze was steady, searching, devoid of accusation. He was genuinely trying to understand. Brenda felt a prickle of irritation. She shifted, pulling a throw pillow into her lap. "Honestly, Dale, you're being oversensitive," she replied, a faint edge in her voice. "I'm just trying to help you, My world, it's a little different. There are expectations, unspoken rules. I'm just trying to help you navigate it." She smiled, a quick, reassuring gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wanted him to see it as helpful, as a sign of her care, not as a criticism. It was for his own good, she convinced herself. He needed to be polished, to fit in, to avoid the kind of quiet dismissal her parents had shown him. Because he loved her, and because he trusted her intentions, Dale accepted her explanations. He saw her earnestness, the underlying concern, or what he perceived as such. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, "I get it. You want me to do well." He believed her, believed in her, even as the small corrections continued to chip away at his confidence. The incidents accumulated, small pebbles thrown into a quiet pond, each ripple expanding. One particular evening, a detailed invitation arrived for a benefit gala hosted by one of Brenda's most influential family friends. Dale had read it, then simply folded it, his intention to accept clear. Brenda watched him. That's it? She asked, her eyebrow raised. You're just going to put it away? Aren't you going to send an RSVP? And how will you phrase it? You need to confirm your attendance with a specific note of appreciation. It's not just a yes or no. Her tone was light but firm, an implicit demand for him to conform to a specific, unwritten code. Dale looked at her, a different kind of quiet settling over his face. He picked up the invitation, unfolded it slowly, and then met her gaze. Brenda, he said, his voice low, steady, I'm on your side, you know that, right? I'm not some business associate you have to manage. You don't have to manage me like I'm your opponent. His words hung in the air, a direct, unfiltered statement. The honesty was stark, cutting through the layers of subtle critique she had been building in. Brenda let out a short, somewhat forced laugh. She waved a dismissive hand. Don't be silly, Dale. That's ridiculous. You're not my opponent. But his words had struck a nerve. The implication that she was treating their relationship like a competition, like she was strategizing against him, unsettled her. It felt too close to the way her mother approached every interaction, every relationship. She pushed the thought away, dismissing it as Dale being overly sensitive again. She was just trying to help, wasn't she? She was trying to protect him from the barbed critiques of her world, from the subtle judgments she knew all too well. She wanted him to be accepted, to be seen as worthy. That was it. I just want you to be accepted, she said, almost to herself, a whisper of a rationalization. Dale's response was quiet, almost a murmur, but it carried a weight that Brenda felt acutely. But you're the one who doesn't seem to see that anymore, he retorted, his eyes holding hers. He wasn't accusing, merely stating what he saw, what he felt. That was his acceptance of himself, his innate worth, the very things she had once been drawn to. Despite his quiet plea, a moment of raw honesty, Brenda's controlling and critical behavior only seemed to escalate. It was as if his gentle pushback solidified her resolve, making her believe she was truly helping him, guiding him. The small corrections became more frequent, the suggestions more insistent. She started editing his emails, choosing his ties, even subtly directing his posture at social events. Each small act, she believed, was for his benefit, a way to elevate him, to make him more suitable for her world. The easy, joyful conversations they once shared, the ones built on laughter and genuine listening, became strained and difficult. He would start a sentence and she would jump in, either to complete it, correct it, or steer it in a different direction. Dale started talking less, withdrawing into himself, his responses becoming shorter, more guarded. The spontaneity, the freedom that had characterized their early talks, evaporated. Their spontaneous adventures, too, once a hallmark of their relationship, dwindled to almost nothing. The weekend trips to obscure antique shops, the impulsive hikes, the late-night drives just to look at the stars, they faded away. Every outing became an event to be managed, a social engagement with specific expectations. The joy of simply being together, without agenda, was lost under the increasing weight of Brenda's self-appointed role as his social engineer. And then the intimacy between them suffered. It grew infrequent, the physical connection becoming more mechanical, almost perfunctory, a routine rather than a passionate expression. Eventually it became rare, another casualty in the slow, silent erosion of trust and genuine connection. The chasm between them widened, filled not with anger or loud arguments, but with the quiet hum of unspoken criticisms and unmet emotional needs. The quiet humiliation began to sharpen, becoming deliberate cuts. At a dinner party with Brenda's college friends, a group known for their sharp tongues and easy laughter at others' expense, the conversation turned to regional accents. Brenda, holding court, her eyes sparkling with what she thought was playful mischief, turned to Dale. Dale, honey, she'd said, her voice a little too loud, say park the car again for everyone. You know, with your charming Midwestern inflection. It's just so darling. She laughed, a brittle sound, encouraging the others to join in. A few chuckles rippled around the table. Dale offered a tight smile, his jaw clenching almost imperceptibly. He repeated the phrase, just as she asked, the soft R of his accent more pronounced under the forced spotlight. The laughter grew a little louder, a few more eyes turning to him. See? Brenda exclaimed, beaming, as if he were a performing seal. Dale excused himself to the restroom a few minutes later. When he returned, his voice, though still calm, was subtly different. The soft R was gone, replaced by a flatter, more neutral tone. His eyes, Brenda noticed, seemed a shade dimmer, the usual warmth slightly dulled, as if a light within had been turned down. Another incident occurred at a gallery opening. Brenda was with her friend Carol, a self-proclaimed art expert who was dissecting a large abstract piece with pretentious disdain. Utterly derivative, Carol declared, sipping her Prosecco. Dale, standing nearby, his attention genuinely drawn to the painting's use of color and texture, spoke up softly. I actually find the layering quite interesting, he commented, the way the artist builds depth with such simple strokes. Brenda immediately swooped in, patting his arm with a condescending gesture. Dale doesn't really understand contemporary art, Carol, she said, her voice airy and dismissive. He's more of a technical mind, logic, algorithms, not so much the nuance of expression. Dale's hand dropped from where he'd been pointing, his shoulders slumping just a fraction. With each such incident, Dale withdrew further. The warmth she had once cherished in him slowly, imperceptibly, began to fade, replaced by a quiet reserve. He became less spontaneous, less willing to share his opinions in company. Brenda, in turn, refused to acknowledge her own role in his retreat. She began to blame Dale, convinced that he simply couldn't handle her world, that he was proving her parents' assessment correct. He was too sensitive, too out of place. Her criticism became pervasive, touching every aspect of his life. His clothes, even those she had once approved of, were now dull. His hobbies, once endearing, were unsophisticated. Even his friends, genuine and kind, were boring. She began to unfavorably compare him to her ex-boyfriends, men from her own privileged background. Marcus would never have hesitated to book a private jet, she'd say, or, Trevor always knew the right thing to say, to Senator Davies. Each comparison was a quiet chip, eroding his self-esteem, his sense of adequacy. She even began flirting with other men in front of him, subtle exchanges of lingering glances and inside jokes. When Dale would object, his voice carefully controlled, she'd turn on him with icy fury. Are you serious, Dale? You're so insecure. Can't I just have a conversation without you getting jealous? Brenda would later admit to herself, in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, that she was subconsciously testing him, pushing him. She wanted him to prove his love, to fight for her, to show her that he was strong enough to withstand the pressure of her world. And perhaps, too, she was punishing him for making her vulnerable, for allowing her to feel a genuine connection that now seemed so fragile, so easily broken by her family's judgment. The week before the annual Hayes Foundation Charity Gala, the very event where Brenda would later publicly humiliate him, they had their worst fight. Dale had returned early from a business trip, a quiet surprise for Brenda. He planned to make dinner, to rekindle some of the old warmth. But when he walked into her apartment, he found Brenda entertaining a few friends she hadn't mentioned, a small, intimate gathering of her usual crowd. Brenda's greeting was cold, her smile tight. You could have called, she said, her voice low, barely audible to her friends. The words were sharp, coated in irritation. She was clearly infuriated by the disruption to her carefully orchestrated evening. Her eyes flashed a warning. Dale, stung, offered, I can go, I just thought. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, a little louder this time, drawing a curious glance from one of her friends. Now you're making a scene. After her friends finally left, their argument erupted. Dale, for the first time since she'd known him, raised his voice. What is happening to us, Brenda? He demanded, his voice strained with genuine anguish. When did I become someone you're embarrassed by? When did I become a burden? Brenda immediately deflected, her own anger flaring. Don't be paranoid, Dale. It's just, you don't always understand the nuances of these situations. But Dale wasn't deterred. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. At the gala next week, he predicted, his voice dropping to a weary calm, you'll introduce me as Dale. Just Dale. No mention of my company, no context, nothing. Just the bare minimum. You'll make sure no one asks too many questions. His accuracy infuriated her more than his anger. She lashed out, her voice brittle with contempt. Maybe if you made more of an effort to fit in, if you understood how things work, I wouldn't have to constantly compensate for you. I wouldn't have to carry the weight of making sure you don't look like an absolute provincial idiot." She took a deep, shaky breath, her chest heaving. "The gala is important, Dale," she said, her voice dropping to a clipped, final tone. "It's important to my family. Just try not to embarrass me, okay?" Dale didn't respond. He simply turned, walked to the guest bedroom, and closed the door with a quiet click that echoed louder than any shout. The Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel ballroom buzzed with the controlled chaos of Boston's social elite. Crystal chandeliers glittered, reflecting off polished marble and silk gowns. The annual Hayes Foundation Charity Gala, the social event of the season, unfolded with practiced precision. Brenda moved through it, a porcelain doll wound tight, a fixed smile on her lips. Dale remained quiet beside her, a dutiful shadow, his presence a stark contrast to the boisterous, self-congratulatory atmosphere. Brenda pulled him along, introducing him vaguely to the city's power players. "This is Dale," she'd say, a casual wave of her hand, her eyes already scanning for the next influential face. She conspicuously avoided mentioning their engagement, the unspoken omission a heavy weight between them. It was as Dale had predicted. Each introduction was a calculated dismissal, reducing him to an unnamed appendage. She caught snippets of conversation near a gilded archway. Her parents, Roberts and Sharon, were holding court, their voices low but clear. "Such a shame Brenda's still with that software fellow," Sharon murmured to a senator's wife, a delicate sigh punctuating her words. Robert chimed in, "Good intentions, I suppose, but no real pedigree, no understanding of our world." A wave of shame washed over Brenda, followed by the familiar, ingrained fear of her parents' judgment. It was a visceral reaction deeper than reason, a fear of disapproval that had shaped her entire life. Then, across the crowded room, Brenda saw Dale. He was engaged in an animated conversation with an older man, a prominent philanthropist Brenda recognized. Dale's face was relaxed, his laugh genuine, a sound she hadn't heard from him in weeks. He looked happy, truly himself, unburdened by her expectations or her parents' silent critique. An irrational resentment, sharp and sudden, pierced through Brenda. How dare he? How dare he find ease and authenticity in her world, a world that she struggled daily to maintain? He dared to be genuinely himself, radiating a calm contentment that she felt she had to suppress to survive. The sight ignited a perverse need to reassert control, to remind him and herself of his place. She approached him, a champagne flute held high, the bubbles reflecting the ballroom lights. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were hard. She interrupted his conversation mid-sentence, her voice light, laced with mockery. "Dale, dear," she chimed, "tell everyone about your little software company. I'm sure they'd be fascinated." His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of caution. He turned to her, then back to the older man, collecting himself. "It's a niche company," Dale began, his voice even. "We develop custom algorithms for data analytics firms, primarily focusing on predictive modeling for market trends." He maintained his composure, a quiet strength in his voice. But Brenda wasn't finished. She cut him off with a bright, brittle laugh. "Oh, he's so humble. It's really just a glorified app he built in his garage, isn't it, darling?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and unsparing. A sudden hush fell over the small group of onlookers. Dale looked at her, and in his eyes, shock mingled with a profound hurt. His composure shattered, replaced by an exposed vulnerability. Brenda saw it, and still, driven by some dark inner compulsion, she delivered the final crushing blow. "Honestly," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate edge, "without my family's connections, he'd be nowhere. He's nothing without me." Dale's eyes met hers. In that instant, the last flickering light died within them. The shock and hurt drained away, replaced by a chilling, profound emptiness, cold and desolate as a winter landscape. It was the same look she had seen in the initial moments of their public humiliation tonight. Only now it was permanent. He calmly set down his champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray. "I think I've had enough," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He turned and without another glance, walked away through the parting crowd, leaving her standing alone amidst the glittering hush ballroom. Brenda watched him go, a sudden, horrifying realization blooming in her chest. The damage was done. Irreparable. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Later that night, long after the last limousine had pulled away from the hotel, Dale left her penthouse. He took only a small bag, packed with the bare essentials, and left without a word, slipping out into the pre-dawn quiet of the city. Her frantic calls and texts over the next few days went unanswered, lost in the void. The engagement, built on genuine connection and then slowly eroded by her fears and insecurities, was irrevocably broken. 6 months had passed since the gala, since Dale had walked away. Brenda sat in her vast penthouse, the city lights twinkling indifferent beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence of the apartment, once a comfort, now felt like a vast, suffocating emptiness. Each room echoed with the memory of him, or more accurately, the absence of him. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was a constant gnawing reminder of her profound aloneness. The raw, horrifying realization had slowly crystallized. She had systematically destroyed the only man who had ever truly loved her for who she was, not for her name or her family's fortune. The image of the light dying in Dale's eyes, the moment his warmth had been extinguished by her cruel words, was burned into her memory. It haunted her nights, replaying in the dark, waking her with a jolt of cold dread. She saw it during the day too, in the reflection of her coffee cup, in the blank screen of her phone. She began to reflect on her upbringing, a painful excavation of her own history. She saw with a clarity that stung how her parents' lessons had poisoned her own values. Sharon's pronouncements about assets and appearances, Robert's quiet dismissals of anyone outside their gilded cage. These weren't just guidelines. They were an insidious venom, twisting her perception of genuine connection. She had been surrounded by privilege, by beautiful things and impressive titles, but she had been utterly unable to recognize true value when she held it in her hands. Dale, with his unassuming sincerity and quiet strength, had been a treasure she'd treated like a common stone, chipping away at it until it crumbled. Her fair-weather friends, the very ones she had tried so hard to impress, had gradually distanced themselves. Her occasional attempts at lamenting her loneliness were met with polite discomfort, then avoidance. They were tired, she realized, of her self-pity, of the drama that didn't directly benefit them. The well of social alliances had run dry, without Dale by her side to balance her out, without his quiet presence lending her an unexpected depth. Her parents, predictably, offered only superficial comfort. "There are plenty of other fish in the sea, darling," Sharon would say, patting her hand. "Someone more suitable will come along." Privately, Brenda knew they were pleased. That common boy was gone. The potential embarrassment, the deviation from their carefully constructed lineage, had been removed. She could sense their relief, a quiet satisfaction that now she was back on the approved path. But Brenda found herself rejecting their empty validation. Their values, she now understood, had led her here to this profound, aching loneliness. Their definition of success had cost her genuine connection, leaving her isolated and desolate. The glittering shell of her life felt hollow, brittle. She desperately missed Dale's quiet laughter, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners. She missed his genuine interest in her thoughts, his calm, steady presence. Most of all, she missed the person she had been with him, the authentic, unburdened Brenda, the woman who could laugh freely, who felt safe enough to be vulnerable. That version of herself felt like a ghost, a memory of someone lost. A tentative hope, fragile and desperate, prompted her to act. She began cautiously trying to contact Dale. Hesitant voice Heirloom were left on his old number, emails sent to his work address. Her messages were clumsy, apologetic, pleading without truly pleading. Each word was carefully chosen, then regretted, then rephrased in her mind. She was met only with silence. His phone number was disconnected. Her emails went unanswered, swallowed by the digital void. The silence was a stark reflection of her new reality, a closed door she couldn't open. He was gone, truly gone. This unyielding silence finally pushed her to seek help. She started therapy, a quiet ritual held twice a week in a discreet office overlooking the city. There she slowly, painfully, began confronting her destructive patterns. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Evans, helped her unpack the immense pressure to conform, the misguided attempt to assert control over Dale as a way to manage her own deep-seated insecurities inherited from a childhood devoid of unconditional love. It was a long, arduous process, stripping away layers of learned behavior, exposing the raw, tender wounds beneath. Through a mutual acquaintance, Brenda eventually learned Dale had moved, not far, but far enough, to a small town in Minnesota. He'd successfully launched a new business, one focused on sustainable tech, and he was engaged to a woman named Sarah. Impulsively, Brenda drove there. She found his charming, unpretentious home, a simple two-story with a porch swing, a stark contrast to her own gilded cage. Dale answered the door, looking calm, content, completely at peace. A woman, Sarah, appeared beside him, radiating a genuine warmth Brenda hadn't encountered in years. Their easy affection was palpable. Brenda's apology, halting and filled with her newfound understanding, met a quiet, unreadable expression from Dale. "Brenda," he finally said, his voice gentle but firm, "I wish you well. I truly hope you find what you're looking for." He paused, his gaze steady. "But the person I loved, the person who genuinely cared for me, she died that night at the gala. You killed her." He explained that he had lost all respect, and without respect, love could not survive. He had found happiness and peace, and he needed to protect that now. Brenda finally understood. There was no going back. The damage was irreparable. Heartbroken, but with a new, bitter clarity, she left, accepting the full weight of her consequences. Returning to her empty penthouse, she faced a solitary future, one entirely of her own making. The true price wasn't just losing Dale, it was facing the emptiness she'd created within herself. She had sacrificed the most valuable thing she ever held, the love of a good man for shallow approval and a fleeting sense of power. The profound loneliness was her undoing. Brenda had sought external validation for so long, mistaking social standing for true worth, that she had systematically dismantled the one genuine connection she ever had. She saw now with chilling clarity that her parents' values had been a poison, turning her into a caricature of the woman she could have been. The silence of her penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was a constant, gnawing reminder of the empty spaces she had created. She returned to her solitary life, the weight of her choices a constant companion. There were no grand epiphanies, no sudden transformations, just a slow, painful process of learning to live with the consequences of her own cruelty. The most valuable thing she had ever held was the love of a good man, and she had sacrificed it for shallow approval and a fleeting sense of power. That debt, she understood, would never truly be paid.